everyone for being here. Hope you're having a good night so far. Can I have a show of hands if this is here for the first time? Alright, we can Alright, so my name is Brittany Ford, and I'm the president of Young Catholic Professionals Omaha. And if anyone is here for the first time, has questions about YCP or membership, or wants to get more involved, please come and talk to me. And I'm going to invite Father Tobias up to give us a quick reflection on the catechism.
All right, well, let's go ahead and start with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us all together this evening. We ask you to pour out your Holy Spirit upon all of us, in a special way upon Mr. Brandon Harvey, our speaker, and make us open to hear what you wish to speak to us this evening. Jesus, we love you and thank you for the sacrifice that you made for us in your passion and death, which we're coming to celebrate this very soon, this next week. We ask that we may, in this holy time, enter deeply into the mysteries, so that we may share with you also the resurrection. We ask this in Christ our Lord. Amen. So I would be a bad chaplain, I think, if I did not speak today about our patron saint, Saint Joseph, the worker, whose feast day was yesterday. The solemnity was yesterday. So I hope you realized yesterday that you didn't have to, do your Lenten penances or anything like that, because it was a solemnity, so it would be fitting to celebrate with the church. If this were a normal year, I would tell you that the solemnity of the Annunciation is coming up. However, because March 25th, the date that usually falls on, is on a Sunday, it's pushed back all the way till April 9th, I think. It's the Monday after the second Sunday of Easter, or Divine Mercy Sunday. So sorry, there's not a second Oasis of Lent this year, and you might have just missed the first one yesterday. So sorry if that's bad news. But anyway, St. Joseph is a great saint that the Church has always held great reverence for. I'm trying to remember the date exactly that it wasn't long ago, but when 1962, I believe, John the 23rd did something really different. He changed something that was established for a long time. And that was Eucharistic Prayer 1, or the Roman Canon, which was the only Eucharistic prayer for a long time. And that Eucharistic Prayer 1, which we use today in English, was the same without any changes, as far as I'm aware, since the Council of Trent, so 1500s. And then even before that, it was basically the same, with maybe some minor changes leading up to that day. But in 1962, Pope John the 23rd inserted the name of Saint Joseph into the Roman canon. So think about how huge of a change that is, like for a prayer that had not been changed for 500 years, pointing to the importance of Saint Joseph in the life of the Church, that they were able to do that. And a lot of saints have had great devotion to Saint Joseph as well. I believe it was Saint Thomas who talked about how everything could be obtained through Saint Joseph. Like other saints, they have their particular specialty there, what they're patron of, but Saint Joseph is for everything. And part of the reason for that, said Saint Thomas, is that Joseph was the father of Jesus, and as such, the foster father of Jesus, and as such, had the ability to keep things, well, to command, for lack of a better word, in the household. And Jesus was obedient to Joseph, the same way that Jesus was also obedient to Mary, which might point to why his intercession is so powerful, because Jesus is still going to be obedient to his Father up in heaven too. St. Teresa of Avila had a great love for St. Joseph too. She actually had a statue she would put a statue of St. Joseph in all the convents that she established. And when she was gone from that convent, she entrusted St. Joseph to watch over the sisters. And when she came back, she would go to St. Joseph and he would make a report to her about the things that the sisters were doing. And they gave St. Joseph the name Paradero, the one like who spoke. So she was really cool. She was a mystic, so she talked to the saints and stuff like that. It was pretty cool. But St. Joseph was her go-to saint too. A lot of virtues that we can imitate in St. Joseph. So I'm just going to kind of list a couple of them. In a particular way, to speak to the men that are present here, because St. Joseph was a man, and a great model for us too. Actually, there's a great hymn that begins, "St. Joseph, you are the man." That's the first line. That phrase continues into the second line. I forget, "You are the man who did something or other," but it's kind of funny. The first line is, "St. Joseph, you are the man." Yeah. But kind of a side note. So I looked a little. I took some of these things from a website called The Catholic Gentleman, which is a great website. So for any of you guys out there, check it out. There's a lot of good stuff on it. But some of the things that Joseph was really good at, some very manly virtues of St. Joseph. His silence. You know, he was a man who didn't say much. We don't have anything of his words recorded in the scriptures. And it's often been interpreted that because of that silence, Joseph was able to listen more intently to the Lord as he spoke to him in prayer. So we also see prayerfulness in St. Joseph. St. Joseph received a lot of messages from God in dreams, which was considered to be a lower form of revelation. You know, like a vision would be a great thing that was like a high form of revelation, but a dream was like a lower form of revelation. And so as Joseph responded to dreams, it's the sense that you get is he responded to the smallest promptings that God gave him. And he showed the great virtue of alacrity, which is a prompt readiness to do things with a spirit of joy. So we see that in St. Joseph, who right after he receives these dreams, gets up and responds and does the thing that he's told to do, which is a great virtue. He makes a lot of sacrifices. You know, he has to take his family out to the place of Egypt when the angel tells him to go out there. He shows a willingness even to endure shame for doing what's right. I don't have too many details about like Jewish wedding customs or anything like that, but the sense I have is that if Mary were found with child before the wedding day, even though they were betrothed, I have a sense that Joseph would have probably taken on shame, because as he says, "This is my wife and this is my child," like claiming Jesus and bringing him into the Davidic lineage, he probably endured some shame as people thought, oh, you know, he could control himself before his wedding day or something like that. So he shows a willingness to endure shame even in doing what's right. We know him as the patron saint of workers, so he shows hard work. He certainly loved Mary and Jesus and was shown to be a great family man. Think about it, that God entrusted the two most precious gifts that he had in the world, Jesus and Mary, to St. Joseph. And St. Joseph, being the father of the family, was one who would guide the family and how things worked. And, you know, Mary and Jesus were obedient to him. Think about that. But what if you were in charge of Mary and Jesus? More particularly, what if you were in charge of like bringing up Jesus and making him a good man? That's a pretty high responsibility, and Joseph was the man that lived up to the task. And then one last thing, perhaps. Well, you know, he kind of shows. Well, the last thing, he shows great commitment, right, in his love for Mary and the family. And yeah, we see that in the way that he brought up Jesus, as well as in the way that he treated Mary in that time that maybe there was that little doubt, and then the angel confirmed the mystery for him. So a lot of great virtues of St. Joseph that we can imitate. There are some church documents out there that you can read about St. Joseph. I forget what one's called. It's like Aquarium something on the devotion of St. Joseph by Pope Leo XIII. But then the other that's bigger is St. John Paul, Pope St. John Paul II's Redemptoris Custos, the Guardian of the Redeemer, on St. Joseph. So if you want to learn a little bit more about him, check those out. And St. Joseph, pray for us.
All right, thank you for that, Father. So our hope for young Catholic professionals is that although you might sometimes feel like a minority in your faith in the workplace, that you can come here and have that community and fellowship and that strength so you can go back to your workplace and spread the faith. And anyone of any profession is welcome for young Catholic professionals. And I know we have quite a few educators that are part of YCP. So it's my pleasure tonight to have Brandon Harvey speak to us. He is an educator himself and also teaches people how to teach the faith, including deacons. And he has founded Chesterton Academy of Omaha, and he'll tell us probably a little bit more about that. And he also teaches theology there. So let's please give him a warm welcome.
I think I prepared the wrong talk. I thought this was the Omaha Lutheran Club, and I prepared a talk called Frodo's Hairy Feet. So I'm a little nervous. I'm kidding. I had the misfortune of joking too much at the front door and saying my last name was Tolkien, and I started walking around with a name tag that said Tolkien, and people thought I was related to J.R. Tolkien. It may have been the happiest day of my life. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you at YCP. I worked in the church since I was 19, so I don't want to tell you how long that's been, but it feels like a very long time. And I find that working in the church is very challenging in the culture we live in because our culture is really a high-paced work environment. If you don't live and breathe your job, you might get left behind. You won't get promoted maybe, or you might not get the raise you want. You might not get noticed. And it's challenging because we have to balance the things that matter most in this world, particularly God and our neighbor, the people that God puts before us. And since I was 19 and started working in the church, I've struggled with that balance. So I'm not here to say, oh, I mastered this balance between vocation and career. I'm here simply because I've struggled. That's simply it. But it's in that struggle that I think we start to see glimmers of how do we keep that balance in this journey of life that we are all on in our own unique vocations. So when I was 19, I was a catechist at a parish, and I loved it. I was one of those catechists that would prepare like 10 hours for my 1 hour with kids. Right? I come in with a suitcase on wheels filled with all the things I wanted to bring to the classroom that day. I was that overly involved catechist. And then the day came when the DRE announced, I'm leaving. And I had the gall to think, I could fill those shoes. And I tried. I really did. I thought, I don't have the expertise. I don't have the knowledge. I'm still in college trying to get a theology degree. Why don't I just give it a try? What's the worst that could happen? They say, oh, we can't hire you. You don't have enough expertise. So I tried it. I took the priest, Father Gary, out to Applebee's. The food was actually really bad. I remember in particular that day, I actually washed the car for the first time in my life. And I couldn't figure out how to get all the streaks off the window. So we were like driving there with these awkward streaks everywhere. I'm trying to play it cool. And I pitched him this idea of how I could try to take on a majority of the position and revision the entire program in a way that would evolve as I grow myself in age. Interestingly enough, he said, okay. I was a little shocked. So I kind of went in there with these people who had been catechists for 20 plus years as a 19-year-old, scared out of my mind. Now, after many years of doing that and really loving that work and being with people in the happiest of times, saddest of times, the good, the bad, and ugly moments, I found two things happening in my heart. The work on the work side, I noticed that there was something in this diocese, it wasn't the Omaha Archdiocese, that was going on that needed to be done. There was no form of regular full-time youth ministry anywhere in the whole diocese, let alone discipleship-based youth ministry, nothing. And I noticed in my work with teenagers, it needed to be done. On top of that, I was about to get married, and I knew that a salary that was several thousand less than what a priest makes was going to be challenging in the life coming up. So I thought, I need to maybe look for a new job. The problem is if I wanted to go into youth ministry and nobody's doing it, that means there's no job openings. So I'm talking about this with a few of my chancery buddies at this place called Buffalo Alice's. We're having pizza and beer. Well, they're having beer. I'm having a Mike's Hard Lemonade, getting made fun of. And I can't, drinking doesn't go well with me. It's just like, I pass out. So it's a side note. It's a red herring. And they say to me, what if you just went out and found all the money and you just did it anyways? Now I was in my 20s and I was definitely young enough to think that might actually happen. I think if it happened now as I'm in my 30s, I'd be like, no way, I've got a family and kids to worry about. So I thought, okay, let's try it out. So I did it. Went to the country club for events, and I went and took people out to breakfast and found a salary, benefits, and a budget. And then went to a parish and said, hey, I'd like to do this here. Oh, we don't have any money. It's okay, I found it. I found the money. And that's how that started. And while there, one of the longest times in my time in ministry, it was amazing to see what God was doing there. But as we're talking about vocations and careers, it was interesting to see the different things that were happening within me. And one of the things I noticed was, as I was getting pulled in for different things, I started noticing very specific skills and gifts I had that the Lord was drawing out of me. And it started when university, I was working on a master's at Steubenville. I didn't even have a master's yet. Asked me to come on as a professor on the side, and I said yes, because I thought, well, I don't have enough to do. I actually did. So I took it on and was teaching these new courses that had never been taught, so trying to get that off the ground and teaching deacon classes and such, and started realizing that my gifts really lie in the areas of theology and teaching. And as we started, we had two kids at that point, Ophelia, Ann, and Benedict Romano, and we had this little itty-bitty house that was the size of most people's garages. No joke, but I love that house. I still drive by it. I'm probably that creepy guy. Whenever I go back into town, I was like, you know what, we need to make a change because we're not going to be able to survive on this forever as our family's growing. But it seems like everything that my gifts are leaning towards, it's really going to require me perhaps to go get a doctorate because it's really leaning in the area that I'm getting pulled more and more into the university world. So we make a plan, going to go get a doctorate in liturgical theology. At the time, Bishop Barron was there, so I was really pumped for that. He wasn't bishop at the time. And we give our notice, we to our jobs, we're going to stay for a few months, sell the house, we've saved up enough, and we move into a temporary living place in an apartment until that time comes, and then the fire comes that day. It was an intense moment, one of the most intense moments ever. And the reason is because it forced me to answer a question I've never had to think about. In fact, one I thought I already knew. What does it mean to have a career, and what does it mean to be a man? It was very challenging because what happened was when we couldn't move anymore, when that plan was going through the window, we came home to Omaha. My wife and I are high school sweethearts, went to Gretna Public Schools together. We came home, and she was the first one to find full-time work, so I stayed at home for a year with the kids, which I thought was going to be real easy, like watching TV all day or something. And then we decided to homeschool, so there was definitely things to do. And it was challenging doing dishes every day, doing laundry every day. It was the most challenging thing. I was like, how many times am I going to wash these jeans? Don't they just stay washed after a while? It was just the same old stuff. And it was very frustrating for me. And I started really questioning, what does this mean for my career? What does this mean about my life? And I realized something. Because a lot of the jobs that I was getting involved in were really jobs that I just kind of fell into that kind of luck. I don't believe in luck, but you know what I mean. For example, my wife says that my tombstone may one day read, Brandon Harvey, the creator of jobs. Right? I've never had a true predecessor before. Right? That I identified, my entire identity was rooted in my career. Everything. So if someone critiqued anything in my work, if anyone critiqued anything in my program or course or an organization I created, it was somehow an assault on me. Right? It was very, very challenging for me. And all of a sudden I had to think through, what does it mean to be a husband? And I was sitting there, and we have this little icon wall, and I'm dusting, and I just was thinking about how ironic this is. I would never dust anything for my mother. Now I'm dusting every day. And I'm praying, and all of a sudden, the words from Ephesians 5 come into my heart, where it speaks, St. Paul speaking to the Ephesians, speaks of Christ handing himself over in love for his bride, the church. And that is what husbands are to do. And that Christ did it to sanctify her. And I realized in that moment that whatever God puts before me, raising $100,000, changing a diaper, doing dishes, recruiting people for a program or event, each and every moment is a moment for me to lay down my life for my God, my wife, and my children. And there is no real difference other than that. It was a very hard thing. It was a very hard thing for me to realize. And after a year of that, I ended up getting back into the rhythm of work. And in that time, I was finding a lot of side jobs. I started dabbling in Catholic films and TV shows and things like that. And I got a job as the first adult evangelization director at Christ the King, where I met Father Toby. I think you're in seminary, right? In seminary. And then a few years after that, I ended up being recruited by the board of Chesterton Academy of Omaha to be the first full-time headmaster, and very proud to see many of our teachers here as well. They're all sitting at a table, so I don't know if, it's like they must actually think they're okay with each other. They don't hate each other, but they're wonderful people, and these are our best teachers, I'll tell you right here. Quinlan Keller says hi, by the way. She couldn't be here. I tried to tell her it was in her contract to be in here, but she didn't believe me. So what's a vocation? The quick answer is it's a calling. And every single human being is called to the bosom of the Father, is called to the heart of the Father. Every human being is called to know God. And when we're called to the Father's heart, when we're called to relationship, to holiness, we realize that we're not alone there, and we're called to then love those in the Father's heart. So to love the Lord our God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We're all called to that. Jesus, at the end of Matthew's Gospel in chapter 28, doesn't say, go out to some nations, preaching to some people, baptizing some people, teaching some people. It's all. There's an emphasis on all. This is the call for every human being. Every one of us is called to this relationship, to holiness. But then each of us have particular callings, and some of us are even in kind of a transition period of calling. How are we going to live that out? For me, it's as a husband, and then subsequently I've been blessed with that includes fatherhood as well. Some it's priests or religious. And a career then is in a sense, for whatever reason, as Catholics, it's merely a means to an end. We might really find delight in our means. It may be a lot of fun some days, and then some days it may not be so good. So like when my teachers don't show up, it's the saddest day for me. I'm just so sad not to see them. But it's a means to an end because it's not in our careers that we come to know who we are. It's not in our careers that we know our identities or our mission. It's ultimately in baptism, confirmation, and Holy Communion. Now the way this looks, this balance, the most easy way to see it, of course, is money. So if I don't work, if I'm like, my vocation's family life, I'm just going to go hang out with my family in the box on the corner because I can't keep a job. I just want to be at home with my family all day. Therefore, for some reason, Father said I can't have a job if I don't come in. Right? That doesn't work. Right? I have to go to work because if I don't go to work, then my family doesn't have money to survive. Right? We need a house. We need clothes. We need food. Right? We need the money to buy more Tolkien books and more Star Trek and Lord of the Rings memorabilia. We need these things. Any pop culture exchange fans out there? No? I love that store. By the Newman Center. Great store. We need things to survive. So the business side of life requires that. We see that with priests. Most priests probably don't go into their vocation saying, I'm going to be ordained and someday I'm going to get to call the snowplow to come in and take care of the snow. Or I get to handle balancing the books when the accountant is retired and we can't find anyone. I have to somehow step in that role. Or we're going to go broke. I can't tell anyone, so I need to raise some money. Right? Most priests don't go into their ordination day thinking about those moments. But we need those moments because if we don't, then there's not going to be Mass. And then the light for the confessional is not going to turn on because the electricity is going to be cut. Right? We need that side of life. We absolutely do for all of our vocations It's what allows a very practical level our vocations to take place in the world that we live in. But it's also about time. Does my vocation allow me the time to rest and recreation? Does it allow me on Sundays and holy days of obligation to treat it as truly a Sunday, or is it just another day? I happen to squeeze Mass in there somehow. Does my work allow me the opportunity to pray? Now, the temptation for me as I get busy is one of two things. I went to Mass today. I have to, it's part of work, but I went to Mass today. That's prayer. Or I said my prayers. I had this prayer. I said the words in a very ritualistic manner, but I was so busy, my heart wasn't there. No. Does my work allow me the time to enter into prayer? Does my work allow me that time? Does it allow me the time to serve those that God has put before me in my vocation? So I almost didn't come to Mass tonight, but luckily all the kids at school got picked up early so I could rush home because I had a board meeting last night. I didn't go home at all yesterday in terms of, I went home eventually, but I didn't go home when my kids were awake. I knew I needed to see my kids. And of course I go in there thinking it's me one of those moments, oh, hey, Daddy, and it's discipline time. All right, I got this, okay. Why are you in trouble? Just tell me, it'll make it easier. But I needed to get home. I need to see my wife and my kids. Does my job bring about delight? This may seem easy, but does it? Or do we find ourselves thinking, I hate this? When we start thinking that way about work, what happens is we don't perform well, which influences our job, which influences our vocation, and then we start to bring the baggage home. If it's me, it's to my wife and my kids. If it's a priest, it could be in the homily. I've never had a homily where the priest says, let me tell you about my problems, but maybe it's happened out there. I don't know. It provides us delight, hopefully. And each of us, our delight is based off of our personality and our skills and our gifts that the Lord has given us. And so it's what really pushes us to grow and to thrive and to develop our skills and our crafts and to mature and to become more and more selfless. Because we find delight in it, we want to grow in it. And each of us, it's different. Some people may really like the personalness of a cubicle because they need a break. Or if you're like me, they like the ability to go around and chit-chat. Right? We all have different gifts and therefore different things that are going to bring delight to us. Will my career allow me to be able to be a true good example of the gospel in both word and deed? I don't know if you know it, but St. Francis of Assisi never said, preach the gospel at all times and, if necessary, use words. He never said it. It's attributed to him, but he never said it. If anything, he lived the complete opposite. I love this notion in Vatican II on the lay apostolate, where it talks about how lay people go out to transform the social order, the society, by not just being a good example, but by awaiting the opportunity to announce the gospel. When I read that for the first time, I envisioned someone in a business world just standing in the corner and someone said something about, oh, have you heard anything about Catholics? I'm Catholic. I'm waiting and I'm here. But does it allow it? Or does my work force me to go against my Catholic faith? That's the reverse side of it. Does it force me to live in fear of my Catholic faith? And hopefully that's not true. Does it allow me the opportunity to love my neighbor? Or do we go to work and we're like, Lord, I really don't love my neighbor. Why'd you make them? And it's a challenge. Whether it's a peer in the workplace, an employer, an employee, a patient, a consultant, a client, whoever it may be, we are called to love them as Christ himself and to show the same amount of hospitality when they come through that door as if it was Christ himself, according to the rule of St. Benedict and, of course, Matthew 25. So does our work environment foster that within us? Not that, of course, our work environment is going to start with Mass for all of us or anything, but does it allow that kind of life to grow, or does it snuff it out? Is it a place where I can be an example to others? I think we often forget that how much young people look to us of how to work like a Catholic, to ask ourselves the question of what makes me in this position different as a Catholic from a non-Catholic? And am I able to demonstrate that to those who might be watching me, especially the young thinking about what they're going to do with their lives? Am I working for money? Am I working for fame? Am I working for pleasure? Am I working to fill my emotional cup? Am I working to find meaning in my life? And ultimately, does it force me to attach myself more to work or more to my vocation? And that's a hard one. That's a hard one. So when you leave work, do you bring work home with you in your head and your heart? Or are we able to let it go? I'm not always great at that. My wife can tell you, last night, not such a good night. Nope. I'm pretty sure an hour later we stopped talking about work. Right. But it happens. Right? It's the struggle. It's the balance that we must find. I always imagine what it would be like if I went to the confessional and if the business side for the priest was really challenging that day. I confess my sins and he says, it's never happened, but I always imagine it'd be funny. You think that's bad? Let me tell you about my day. Luckily, it's never happened. I'm the headmaster at Chesterton Academy of Omaha. We're located at 40th and Davenport between Dodge and St. Cecilia's Cathedral, right next to and also occupying part of the space of St. Barnabas Catholic Church. We're a small school in our third year. We started with 4 or 5 students, and we've pretty much doubled every year. We're at 21. We may hit as close to 50 in the fall. As some of my teachers can tell you, today was intense because we had 5 shadow students today, 1 yesterday, another one coming later this week. We are what's called a classical school. It's hard to articulate because it once was just school, and then it just somehow something else came in. It's what's been used for the last 2,500 years, and if you ask anyone that applied for a job anywhere in the 70s through 90s, if they ever saw in an application the word grammar school, that's a classical school. That's what you call a classical elementary school, a grammar school. Classical schools are very much on the rise right now. We don't see it as much in the Midwest. There's been 3 or 4 that have opened in the area in the last couple of years. Some dioceses, bishops are requiring all their Catholic schools to convert over to a classical model, what we might call the traditional liberal arts. And its rise in not just the Catholic world, not just in the Protestant world, but even state schools and states that have charter schools. It's really on the rise. In fact, majority of the state's #1 high schools in this country are classical schools. You ask Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and many of the Cardinal Newman schools, who do you recruit the most? Oftentimes, it's classically trained students. Now, we're not quite at that level yet. We're still growing and developing. It's like starting a business. Year 3 of a business is still a challenge. We have those challenges. We are struggling to find enough people for staff because we're still growing our fundraising and such. So I remember that every time I sweep or have to clean a toilet, and I think to myself, this isn't in the job description, but okay, it needs to be done. In our school, we have a huge focus on what's called Socratic discussion. It's kind of the stereotype, to be honest. Everyone claims that, though, with an emphasis on the basic skills of learning, note-taking, speaking, summarizing, writing papers, not as much on worksheets, for example. So for most high school teachers, they oftentimes will have 100+ graded worksheets in a year for one student in one class. Not all schools, but the average. I can't remember what statistic that's pulled from. I memorized it a year ago. It's out. For us, it's read this, find the information. And it's always hard, especially for our freshmen. How do I do that? Just start reading, write it down. You'll figure it out. In many of our classes, we use primary sources rather than textbooks. So for example, our students don't read a book about Plato. They have to read his volume of the complete works. So it's more about what does it actually say than rather what is someone's interpretation of what it says. All of this happens in the context of what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, and let's look at the great works of Western civilization to notice the commonalities of the true, the good, and the beautiful. There's also a huge emphasis on reasoning skills. So for example, in catechism class, we'll debate things that aren't even in the catechism, but they have to logically make the claim based off of a doctrine, even though the issue isn't in there, like what's better, to receive communion on the tongue or in the hand? There's nothing in the catechism that talks about it, but they have to make that argument. And if any of them falls into what we call a logical fallacy, they lose points on their grade. So there's a huge fight to make sure that they're not full of logical fallacies. We have daily Mass every single day of the week at St. Barnabas Catholic Church. 5 days a week. We've had one day where we couldn't have Mass because of a problem with a priest being out of town. The sub-priest's car broke down on the way there. We have monthly adoration and confession, which I think is a tremendous help for our students. And all of our teachers, staff, and board members must take a public oath of fidelity to the teachings of the church each year. We have over here at this table one of these. So if you could grab one, it would make me feel really good about myself if I could see them all gone and not in the trash can because someone's trying to do me a favor. If you could actually grab one. So we have our upcoming gala at Christ the King Church on April 14th, a Saturday, and we have Joseph Pierce coming in. So if you're into that sort of stuff, he's an amazing speaker and author. He's actually my favorite of authors that are alive. I did not vote for him to come. I thought that would be self-serving, but he is going to sit at my table. It's definitely happening. But before I end, I thought, because of the nature of the talk about trying to struggle through this balance of vocation and career, I thought I would share these final thoughts. More than what I do at Chesterton, this Friday, March 23rd, marks the anniversary of the day I was baptized as an infant. I'm very excited. My family, it's a big day. My wife and I have been a couple for more than 15 years, or almost 15 years. Married for some time of that. She remembers the number, you can ask her. Lately, we've had some wonderful games of Chinese checkers, discussing books we're both reading, getting into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because there's no politics in it, so we kind of like that. And learning to actually try to make it through the house chores together, as hard as it is with four small children. My daughter is preparing to receive confirmation and First Communion this May, so we're excited for her. It was her dream, and so today she found out everything's a go for one sacrament, and then she had the other sacrament okayed a couple weeks ago. So she's really excited. She's our reader in the family. At age 6, she was reading the Narnia series and Hobbit. Now she's reading Little Women and taking notes on the catechism for the Eucharist. And it's interesting, she'll spell transubstantiation right, but spell the word color wrong. All right, not going to be a perfectionist. I'll take it. On our last father-daughter date, we went to Timbers, went to Mass, and then we went shopping for some clothes. It was wonderful. This weekend, we have our next father-daughter date, and we're going to some ballet. My wife told me to go, so we're going. My son is going to turn 6 soon. He, of course, loves St. Michael and St. George. He loves archery, and he thinks he likes soccer, but I'm pretty sure he likes just the other kids. He also is very proud of the fact that he's finally beginning to learn to read. We recently went on a father-son day together, and we went to Mass, got breakfast, and at the restaurant we sat and colored books together and did our own little private Bible study on the book of Sirach, which was a lot of fun with my little guy. Little Joseph Ratzinger. It's kind of weird that we named him that. We thought it was a good idea at the time, but when he gets in trouble, it's kind of awkward. Joseph Ratzinger, put your diaper back on. That's not natural. He is so wild and cute, and he's at that stage where none of his words quite make sense, where he, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. I may be the first person at YCP who's going to say this. He got out of the bath and had an accident on the rug and go, "Pee fall down." Yes, it did. Good. Maybe I'll go in the history books for mentioning that at YCP. Recently, we had our Father-Son Day where we went out for Mass, and then it doesn't seem like much. We went to the CVS as I was waiting for my prescription, and I just, for half an hour, moved him around in that cart with the car on the front. For 30 minutes, he was so happy. And then at the very end, he finally realized that if you hit the button, it makes a honk noise, and he didn't want to leave. Then we got some candy, went for a walk, It was wonderful. And Agnes, little baby Agnes, she let me hold her today. So that's my dad moment. We're all pumped for Holy Week. I love my family. I like to work. I feel like I'm good at what I do in my career. And it's a lot of fun. I take a lot of delight in it. But at the end of the day, what wakes me up in the morning, what pushes me to get in my car to go home is my God and my family. I love them to pieces. They bring me more joy and excitement than I could possibly know. I can't imagine any other vocation. And I don't think if we didn't go through that year of what I would call absolute not so good times. I don't know if I can say that one word. That, I think, was the definitive moment where I finally heard the call. I was married, yes, but what it meant to be a husband and father finally came through. So thank you for the chance to be here, and happy to take any questions.
Were you in a household while you were in Steubenville?
I was not. I was a summer student. So I traveled there and would go during the summers, which was challenging. The first time I went, my daughter turned 1, and I came back, and she didn't recognize me. It was beyond challenging. She cried when she saw me at the airport. I thought I was going to go to like Daddy Limbo or something for that. So no, I wasn't. So it was an interesting experience. It was mostly all adults, mostly all people with facial hair, mostly. I don't think I ever had a female. No, there was one girl in the class, yeah. So we just kind of all remarked that, because Scott Hahn has facial hair, we must have facial hair. And we did. Yes. Hence, right, because he has a beard right now. I'm kidding. This is just laziness.
I went to a classical or a high school too, I guess you would say, and there was a man who spoke, a guest speaker, Dale Alquist, who was down at a Chesterton Academy. Wondering if you guys had a connection there, or if it's a similar inspiration.
Yes, it's much like a franchise in many ways. So he founded this in Minneapolis, and then what's happened is they've started to pop up around the country and also in Italy. I don't know if they've spread beyond Italy or not in terms of the international scene. So it's kind of an approach, and it's growing. You're seeing this in all forms of the classical world, where because of the fact that the material is just so much similar from school to school, not because you must do this, it's Plato, it's Aristotle, it's Beowulf, right? Is that these other schools are starting to create almost like a franchise version of their school to help other schools like us that are getting off the ground to have a place to start.
So let me qualify this by saying I'm not asking this for myself. And you'll understand in a second. But you said something about, you kind of led us through like an examination of conscience with like our workplace. And I'm wondering what kind of advice you might have to somebody like who feels that their workplace is not helping them in their vocation.
And that happens. I've been there for things here and there. I had the misfortune of working in a work environment in the Catholic world where I was the only pro-life person that worked in the office. And I went to 40 Days for Life, and I was scrutinized deeply. It was very challenging. I say in that moment, we have to work. So it can't be, I'm not going to work here, I'm going to go beg and hopefully get by. So we stay there, but we start looking. We start looking and praying that it gets better. And if it gets better, then it's the Lord showing us that that's where He wants us, but He's allowing us some form of suffering for some reason, to build character, as the epistles say, maybe, I don't know. But start looking, there's no harm. At the worst case scenario, sometimes what happens is we gain a new appreciation for where we're at, because we realize, oh, this might be an industry thing. It may not be a me thing, it's maybe an industry thing. So it provides some perspective, but I'd say you have to stick with it, provide for your vocation and whatever that is until you find something that will really allow your vocation to flourish.
Hi, you crushed it. 2 questions for you. Do you not just so much like have like needs, but do you have someone who does like data for you guys, like to look at how you're doing like on a broader scales, like at different schools in Omaha, like looking at how your classes like differentiate between like
Say the second one again.
Your patron saint and how they stalk your life.
Personally, my personal patron saint. Just making sure. So open up. I'm open to the data idea. Totally open. So find me on LinkedIn. Totally open to that. No, not right now because we're still in business startup mode. Patron saint for me is kind of fluctuated. For whatever reason, I've really gravitated towards Saint Raphael, the archangel, in the book of Tobit, because there's this beautiful prayer about marriage that has really just always spoken to me. But really, a lot of it comes from just meditating on the idea of Jesus, the bridegroom. That's a big part. There's a book out there called, I can't remember what exact title, but Jesus, the Bridegroom, I think by Brant Petrie. And the book just changed my life because I finally understood, even as a man, how do I see Jesus as my bridegroom? It was a wonderful book. So, thank you.